Hi, my name's Phil. I like to write politics. In this video I want to discuss the Mail on Sunday's front page, which included a savage attack on the Labour leader. Now, a statement like that would have had me quite downcast over the past decade or so, but this time it's actually quite hilarious. A good time to be alive as Conservative opponents, at least for those of us who can survive this insane government. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, Boris Johnson's first Prime Minister's questions against new Labour leader Keir Starmer was quite bad, very bad in fact. Well, bad for Johnson that is, and those on the right wing of politics who wish to keep him in position. Johnson's second attempt last week was, if anything, even worse. And so the pattern for the future has seemingly been set. It's obvious to all critically thinking observers, whether on the left or the right of politics, or even those firmly planted in the centre, that Starmer is going to continue demolishing Johnson in his calm, calculated way. One comment on social media last week noted that Keir Starmer was going to have to watch his weight because he keeps having Boris Johnson for breakfast. Jacob Rees-Mogg was allowed to speak for the first time in about half a year and said that all MPs should return to Parliament immediately. The Financial Times was reporting senior Tories, including at least one unnamed cabinet minister, being increasingly pessimistic about Johnson's chances in future exchanges with Starmer. They believe that the quiet Commons chamber during the social distancing measures are playing to Starmer's strengths, who is an experienced courtroom practitioner after all, and the lack of braying Tory cheers from behind Johnson is unsettling the Prime Minister, which, if you think about it, is a pretty frank admission that Johnson has no substance at all. All he has is tub thumping and a load of sycophantic cheering behind him to try and make him look good. Without it, he is all at sea. He's got nothing. Besides, even when the tub thumping returns, which may not be for some time, Starmer will still be exposing government failings with laser-guided precision. The Telegraph last week decided that Johnson was simply not up to it and wrote a piece absolutely savaging his performance, but I did talk about that last week. Then some of the headbangers decided to play the man rather than the ball and tried to smear Starmer. I mean, after all, it does work. It's the sort of thing that works. It works in any context. Definitely worked a treat against Corbyn. But a smear works best if it's, in actual fact, an exaggeration of something genuine. When it's just completely made up, it's much easier to debunk. Much, much less effective. And it seems that the right can't dig up any real dirt on Starmer at all, even to exaggerate. Nadine Dorries gave it a go last week when she tried to smear his time as Director of Public Prosecutions, which ended up going so badly for her that by the time the day was out, her own party had to publicly reprimand her, as well as the other two Conservative MPs who decided to get in on the act. So her efforts actually did more damage to the Conservatives and her personally than to Labour and Starmer. In fact, Starmer ended up coming out quite well out of it, because the smear was the opposite of what had actually happened. It wasn't just that it was untrue, it was the opposite. But then yesterday, the Mail on Sunday decided to have a crack of their own. So Nadine Dorries, absolute idiot, she made a right hash of that. We can do a better job. And this is absolutely priceless. Priceless. Not on their front page. You know, they saved that for attacking doctors in addition to teachers. But inside its hallowed pages was this. So it tries to attack Starmer's Man of the People tag by saying he owns land worth up to £10 million. Now, the story isn't actually true as stated in the headline, because the land in question would only possibly be worth that if it had planning permission for housing development. It doesn't. And indeed couldn't, because I gather it's built it exists on Greenbelt land, which means you can't get such planning permission. But that's not the hilarious aspect. You know, even if the story explains the reason for it, you know, if you look in the actual article, it says that the reason Keir Starmer owns this field, which is what it is because he bought it 24 years ago for his mother, so that his mother could turn it into a donkey sanctuary. I mean to say, is that the best they can do? Boris Johnson is crumbling right now, and he's crumbling because of Starmer, who is now presenting Johnson with the first real opposition that this man has ever faced in his life. And now the hard right are desperate to take him out. And this is it. Extra. Read all about it. Keir Starmer saves abused and neglected donkeys for his mother, whom he loves enough to spend his savings on. That's it. And I remember when Corbyn stood down as leader and people were talking about his successor, and people were saying, well, you know, whoever the new leader is going to be absolutely savaged by the right-wing press. It won't be any different. I mean, sure enough, they will be absolutely savaged. It happens to all Labour leaders. But the difference it makes when they can't actually land any blows, when they don't really have anything to go on and they just have to completely make it up, or when they have to somehow make a vice out of loving your mother and helping animals in distress. And the story won't even work on those of a right-wing mentality, because they won't see what the paper wants them to see. What they will see is, oh, guy from working class background who came from nothing rises to the top of his profession and can afford to buy a field. It's not really going to work on them either, is it? And the story has completely backfired, needless to say. As a direct result of this, social media is now awash with stories about how Starmer spent his savings on his mum to save animals. If anything, it will have actually acted to win people over. And the people who weren't going to be won over anyway are never going to be won over. And yes, I'm sure they're going to keep on at this over the next few years. They'll keep trying things out. They'll make all sorts of stuff up. But if this is anything to go by, I'm a lot less worried than I was when they were employing such strategies against Corbyn or even Miliband. And they needed it. The Mail needed this. This was their shot. The Telegraph may be happy to oust Johnson. They want a Conservative government. They're not that bothered about it being led by Boris Johnson. They aren't complete loonies. But the Mail are. They need Johnson in place. They don't just want a Conservative government. They want Johnson there because his successor may not be anywhere near insane enough for them. This was their shot to keep Johnson in place. This was them pulling out all the stops to derail Starmer ahead of what might be a third and even more disastrous Prime Minister's questions this Wednesday. And this was the best they could do. And they knew it wasn't going to be a really telling shot because it wasn't on their front page. It was a desperate lunge at Starmer that saw them fall face forwards into the mud. And finally, what I'd like people to do is to try and consider the context of this in terms of political power in the UK. We've only just had a general election. The Tories won a massive majority. It doesn't matter whether Boris Johnson is brought down or not. That is utterly irrelevant as far as the right are concerned, because the Conservatives will still be in power and they'll still be in power for years. The Conservatives have a very large majority in Parliament. Yes, the party can, because of that, in fact, actually, because of that comfort, they're free to start having their internal squabbles again. And they will do. There's a big squabble coming up as well, a big squabble. But Boris Johnson can fall and they'll just elect a new leader and they'll still carry on. They're not going to have a general election for 4.5 years. The only reason for any Conservative leader as Prime Minister to call an early general election would be if they thought that they could retain or extend their majority. And surely now they know they cannot do that with Starmer in charge of Labour. It's not going to be possible. So they will delay the general election as much as possible. And there's no hope of a split in the Tory party calling for a general election, because many of those MPs will just risk losing their seats. They are in power for years. You could understand this sort of panic on the right if a general election was imminent. Starmer is now ahead of Johnson in personal approving ratings, although Labour as a party have some way to go still, but a trend is now set and it is emerging. And the right is melting down right now when we're years away for that general election. They're melting down now, throwing desperate attacks on Starmer. And that speaks volumes about the damage that they think that he can do, even with his performances right now, for the next general election in a year's time. Because otherwise they wouldn't be panicking. They'd be thinking, okay, Johnson's making a right arse of this. Let's get through this. Let's get through this coronavirus. Then let's get through Brexit. Then we'll torpedo Johnson. Then get someone else in and build up to the next general election. You know, I would have thought they'd be perfectly calm about it, but they're not. So they believe, whether rightly or wrongly, that the damage being done now could be permanent damage that will still play on people's minds, even if they somehow sort themselves out in a few years. They're not even giving themselves a year or two to sort themselves out. They're panicking now. And that's encouraging for me. But anyway, I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.